I thank this Democratic whip for his courtesy. Republican senators have come to the floor today to talk about education, no child left behind, and I ask consent that we be allowed to engage in a colloquy.
Without objection.
I thank the President, and could you, the senators who will be here will be Senator Isakson, Burr, Kirk, and Senator R-N.C. Will you let each of us know when we've consumed 5 minutes?
The chair will do so.
I thank the President. Mr. President, in the world in which we live, every American's job is on the line. And as every American knows, better schools mean better jobs. And schools and jobs are alike in this sense. Washington can't create good jobs, and Washington can't create better schools. But Washington can create an environment in which others can create good jobs, and in which teachers and principals and students and a community can create better schools along with their parents. So a good place for Washington to start is with the 5 pieces of legislation that we introduced today to fix the legislation known as No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was a bipartisan effort in 2001 and 2002. President Bush and Democratic members of the Senate and the House and Republicans as well agreed on it. By 2014, the legislation said the 50 million students in our public schools, in nearly 100,000 public schools, would be proficient in reading and math. There would be state standards and tests to those standards and requirements that the more than 3,000 teachers be highly qualified. There would be school report cards by subgroups of students. And schools who failed to make what was called adequate yearly progress would receive federal sanctions. There would be more choices of schools and charter schools for parents. During the last 9 years, federal funding for schools has increased by 73%, even though student achievement has stayed relatively flat. Our legislative proposals today would set a new, realistic, but challenging goal to help all students succeed and to end the federal mandates, which has Washington, D.C. deciding which students and teachers are succeeding and failing. Our legislation would require states to have high standards that promote college and career readiness for all students, would continue the reporting of student progress so parents and teachers and communities can know whether students are succeeding. It would encourage teacher and principal evaluation systems relating especially to student achievement. That would replace the federal definition of a highly qualified teacher. It would consolidate federal programs and make it easier to transfer funds within local school districts. It would expand charter schools and give parents more choices. And for the bottom 5% of schools, the federal government would actively help states turn them around. Mr. President, much has happened during the last 10 years, and it's time to transfer back to states and to local governments the responsibility for deciding whether schools and teachers are succeeding or failing. Since 2002, 44 states have adopted common core academic standards. 2 groups of states are developing common tests to see whether students are meeting those standards. And more than 40 states are working together to develop common principles for holding schools accountable for student achievement. Thanks to No Child Left Behind, we now have several years of school-by-school information about student progress that puts the spotlight on success, and it puts the spotlight on where work needs to be done. In addition, many states and school districts are finding ways to reward outstanding teaching and school leadership, and to include student performance as a part of that evaluation. As common sense as that idea may seem, not until Tennessee created the Master Teacher Program in 1984 had one state paid one teacher 1 penny more for teaching well. All of the sponsors of the 5 pieces of legislation we introduced today are Republicans, but many of the ideas were either first advanced or have been worked out in concert with President Obama and with his excellent Education Secretary, Arne Duncan, as well as with Democratic senators here and with Republican and Democratic colleagues in the House. In other words, we've made a lot of progress. In the Senate, my judgment is we're not far from agreement on a bipartisan bill with most of the differences of opinion centering around what I would characterize—
Senator's 5 minutes has expired.
I ask for 2 more minutes, thank you.
Without objection.
Characterized as including provisions that would create a national school board. Mr. President, we on the Republican side want to continue to work with our colleagues across the aisle in the House. Our purpose in offering our ideas today is to spur progress so we can enact a bill before the end of the year. The House of Representatives has enacted its first bill to fix No Child Left Behind. It would expand charter schools. It's like the charter school bill that Senator Kirk will introduce today. The President has given us his blueprint. He has met with us. The Secretary has warned us that under existing law, most schools will be labeled as failing schools within a few years, and he is proposing to use his waiver authority to avoid that. The Secretary clearly has that waiver authority under the law, and I support his use of it in appropriate ways. I'm introducing legislation today to make it clear that, to me, the appropriate use means using the waiver to accept or reject state proposals based upon whether those proposals enhance student achievement and not to impose a new set of Washington mandates. But the best way for us to relieve the Secretary of the need to consider waivers and to help American children learn what they need to know and be able to do is to us to work together in the Senate and in the House to fix No Child Left Behind. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record following my remarks, or following the remarks of all of the senators, the following information: why we need to fix No Child Left Behind, how the environment has changed in the past 10 years, a summary of the 9 proposals that Secretary Duncan and Senator Harkin, Senator R-N.C, and others of us have worked on, a summary of the legislation introduced by Senator Isakson to change Title I, that I'm a principal sponsor of to change Title II, a summary of Senator Burr's proposal on Titles II and IV, Senator Kirk's summary on charter schools, and the summary of the legislation on waivers. And now, Mr. President—
Without objection, the senator's 2 minutes has expired.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Isakson of Georgia has a distinguished career in education, not just as a leader in the Senate of Georgia, but as the chairman of the Georgia School Board appointed by Governor Zell Miller, and as a member of the House of Representatives and a key author in 2001 and 2002 when No Child Left Behind was enacted.
I thank the recognition by the great senator from the state of Tennessee, whose own record in education is quite distinguished, everything from a university president at the University of Tennessee to his leader on the Health, Education, and Pensions Committee, and obviously his service as Secretary of Education of the United States of America. I appreciate the reference, too, to 10 years ago when we wrote No Child Left Behind. There were 9 of us, 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats, who locked ourselves up in the House Education Committee offices for about 6 weeks, writing a document that became the law of the land and has served the country well for 10 years. Title I provision of that is the free and reduced lunch provision. It's the main title of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it's the main title that delivers educational content requirements and regulations under No Child Left Behind. The reason that I'm a sponsor, the principal sponsor of the reform of Title I, is because No Child Left Behind requirements under Title I have worked, and it is time to go to the next step. And I want to be very specific about saying it worked. As everyone knows, adequate yearly progress, or AYP, is the goal of Title I, to see to it that every child every year is making adequate yearly progress towards improvements in reading, comprehension, and mathematics. When we started AYP, we knew when we wrote it that if the bill worked, it would become harder and harder and harder to reach AYP because the baseline was being built every single year. And the reason Senator Alexander talked about so many schools falling into needs improvement is because we've pushed the achievement level so high that meeting AYP on a continuing improving basis is difficult. So it is time to terminate AYP as a requirement of the bill, but it's not time to throw out the system that made it work. Disaggregation of students, first of all, was critically important. In public education in the United States prior to the No Child Left Behind law, school systems and schools basically hid behind mean average scores, or an ITBS mean average score, or a comparison of ITBS test scores to other states in the nation, which was an aggregation of all students' performance and an averaging of that performance. It took the eye off the ball, it took the eye off the individual student. So what No Child Left Behind did said you will test every student, you will disaggregate them by sex, by race, by disability, by non-English speaking, and you will rate each disaggregated group on AYP, and if only one of those groups in a school or a system fails to make adequate yearly progress, then the whole school goes into needs improvement. And so you have a lot of schools being labeled needs improvement while they're making the best improvement they've ever made. So it is time to end AYP, but it's not time to end the disaggregation or the test score. The greatest accountability measure, and all of us as politicians know it, is transparency. This bill will require the transparency of all the test scores of each individual child and each individual transparency of each individual disaggregated group to ensure we continue to know how our kids are doing and compare them on a year-to-year basis. But we do away with needs improvement because it has served its purpose. Now, on disaggregated groups, there's one other thing the Title I change does that I want to particularly emphasize on the floor today. The biggest disaggregated group in terms of causing systems or schools to fall in needs improvement are those special needs children considered under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act. They are all individuals who have an individual disability that affects their academic achievement or their ability to learn. When we passed IDEA in 1978, if I remember correctly, in Public Law 94-192, we dictated that we would give special emphasis in training those special needs kids and try and identify their special needs and meet them within the public education system. When No Child Left Behind disaggregated them into a single group and tested them, we tested 98% of them with the same paper and pencil test. Now, these are kids with a plethora of different disabilities that one single test could not possibly meet. We gave a 2% cognitive waiver, a disability waiver, so that they could have an alternative assessment for up to 2% of the students, but 98% had to take the same test. This reform of the IDEA portion of Title I of No Child Left Behind simply says this: every year, in the beginning of the school year, when the parent and the teacher and the school meet to put out the individual education plan, the IEP for that student, the parent, the teacher, and the school will determine what the assessment vehicle that best measures the assessment of that child will be, not a single one-size-fits-all paper and pencil test. That is going to ensure that IDEA students get the individual attention they deserve and the measurement against the individual disabilities that they have that's appropriate as approved by their parent, their teacher, and their school. And it will make a remarkable difference for our IDEA kids, and I'm very proud of that provision and the flexibility it gives to the systems to assess appropriately rather than force a one-size-fits-all test against 98% of our disabled or children with disabilities. So to repeat where I said at the beginning,
Senator's 5 minutes has expired.
Good time for me to repeat what I said at the beginning. I'm proud to be building on the success of No Child Left Behind, and I'm proud that Senator Alexander has taken the leadership on this committee to move forward on the reauthorization of IDEA and No Child Left Behind.
Senator Isakson for his leadership in education in the state of Georgia and on this bill. Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina has for years focused on elementary and secondary education, especially on making it easier for local school districts to use the federal dollars that are made available, and on finding ways to encourage student and teacher evaluation. He is introducing a bill which I'm proud to co-sponsor on Titles II and Title IV.
I thank the senator from a state once owned by North Carolina and a distinguished member of this august body. Mr. President, what are we simply here doing today? We're responding to what every CEO has said and every local leader has said and every parent has said. If you want a future in this country, you've got to fix K through 12 education. You've got to make sure that every child in this country has the foundational knowledge to meet whatever challenge they're faced with in a lifetime. Now, Washington's good at sort of coming up with new programs, and to be honest with you, when you look back over the history of the last couple decades, every year we come up with a new program to fix K through 12. What's the obvious thing? We never fix it. But the one thing that we hear loud and clear from people who are on the front lines, those elected and those non-elected, those who are charged with educating our children, is, my gosh, give me flexibility. You can't design one program in Washington that works in Raleigh, North Carolina, and works in Knoxville, Tennessee, much less in rural North Carolina or rural Tennessee. What I propose today is very simple, that 59 pots of money, 59 different programs, be merged into 2 pots, and that those local school systems have the flexibility and the capability to choose what they're going to use that money for to educate our kids. What a novel thought, that we would take the people on the front line. You see, for the first time, I'm suggesting Washington give up the power that we've got to say, you'll do it our way, or you won't get the money. We're faced in the future with some degree of austerity. We're not going to have the money to throw it out and see what works. But that's Washington's typical response. Now it's time that we begin to focus on things, not that we think work, that the teachers and the principals and the elected officials locally, but more importantly, the community decide that it works. Johnny alluded to a number of things that we use as far as how we gauge success or failure. I'm going to tell you the gauge we ought to have is, what's a parent think? And the likelihood is, by the time we get those standard tests, it's probably too late to fix it for their kids, but it may fix it for somebody else's. What we're attempting to do today as we reform K through 12 education through these bills is we're trying to lay the gauntlet down and say no child will be exposed to an inferior education in the future, because we're going to empower not Washington, we're going to empower the local community. Now again, simply what I'm doing in the Empowering Local Education Decision-Making Act of 2011 is to take 59 programs under the elementary and secondary education and to put them into 2 flexible foundational block grants. Now some might say, well, the state's going to steal money off of it. No, we limit. The state can get 1.5% to administer the program. It's got a strict formula that says exactly how this money is going to be distributed, so it's done fairly. Where we don't exercise Washington authority is we don't tell the local school system, here's the only way you can use it. We say to the local school system, here are 59 programs. You pick the ones that best fit what your needs are in your community. In addition to that, those 2 pots of money that we've created are 100% transferable. If you feel that one pot doesn't meet the need, which might be in your area, then you can shift all that money over to the other pot. So if you believe that focusing on teacher quality is better versus students, you've got the flexibility to do it without asking us for a waiver. In addition to that, if Title I is somewhere where you need additional funds, both pots of money are transitional to Title I to additionally support at-risk kids. There's something that we've never done here. Just this week, I received from the Council of Great City Schools, coalition, by the way, of our nation's largest central school districts. In their letter, and I quote, they wrote this: both Title II and Title IV of the Elementary Secondary Education Act have become unwieldy and unfocused over the past authorizations and are in substantial need of rewriting. Your effort to simplify and clarify the purposes and flexibilities within these programs is noteworthy. With budgetary constraints faced at all levels of government, streamlining federal requirements, providing predictable and consolidated formula-based funding streams to local school districts, and ensure local district decision-making in the use of these funds under your bill is particularly welcomed. I urge my colleagues, read these bills. Look at your school systems. Make a decision that's right for the future of every child in this country and support our reauthorization efforts. I thank the senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I thank the senator from North Carolina, Senator Burr, for his insight and leadership on how do we help create an environment in which teachers, parents, principals, and community leaders can make schools better rather than send orders from Washington to tell them how to do that. Senator Kirk from Illinois will be here within a few minutes to introduce the charter school bill, which is the same bill that passed the House of Representatives yesterday with, I believe, about 365 votes in a bipartisan way. As I mentioned at the outset, our purpose here today is to get things moving. We think there ought to be a law before the end of the year that fixes No Child Left Behind. And toward that end, the senior member of the Senate Health, Education, and Labor Committee, Senator R-N.C. of Wyoming, began quietly more than a year ago to meet with the chairman of the committee, Senator Harkin, and with Secretary Duncan, and on some occasions with the president. And we were able to come to a good deal of agreement about fixing No Child Left Behind, and then on the 9 areas that we would focus on, which I put into the record a few minutes ago. Senator R-N.C. is here, and I thought he might want to speak about that, because while all of us who are introducing these bills today are Republicans, we're only doing that as a way of moving the process and hoping to attract Democratic support so we can have a bipartisan result. I believe at the same time Senator R-N.C. is continuing to meet with Senator Harkin, the chairman of the committee, with the hope that we'll achieve that bipartisan result.
Senator from Wyoming.
I want to thank the senators who have spoken for all of their efforts and thought. A lot of times people think that what's being discussed on the floor here is the only thing that's happening with Congress. There are things happening in the background that are probably achieving more than the debates that happen here. A lot of times what you get to see here is the blood on the floor that results in nothing. But everyone recognizes the importance of education and recognizes that there was a significant effort made since 1965 with K through 12 education. It's been renewed several times. In every single instance, it's been renewed in a very bipartisan way. We want that to continue to happen. The value of the Senate and the House is to have a lot of different opinions on how something can be done, and then to bring those together to form something usable in whatever area we're working on. I just can't thank Senators Alexander, Isakson, Burr, and Kirk enough for the work that they've done in this area. It does help us to focus, and I am working with Senator Harkin to try and come up with a bipartisan bill, and I think we've been making good progress. I've used these parts of the bills that you've heard about as reasons for stepping back and taking a look at what we're really doing to make sure that the states can have as much of a role as possible, but the local people have an even greater role in what's happening in education. And that's where we're trying to keep the focus. And this has been very helpful in my discussions with Senator Harkin to make sure that we stay on track with those things. Senator Alexander mentioned the 9 things, and Secretary Duncan traveled through most of the United States holding listening sessions to see what kinds of problems people had. And he agreed that the 9 things that we had on this list were the problems with No Child Left Behind that needed to be fixed. And Senator Harkin looked at that list and agreed in the same way. And so we've come up with some solutions, and those need to be put into a bill, and that bill needs to be passed this year. Next year we get into presidential elections. I can't see where that's going to make things more bipartisan or help education. There are a number of things that No Child Left Behind did. One is the disaggregation, which did show some problems across the country where kids were being left behind. A lot of times when we focus on education, we focus on the state and we focus on the school district. Once in a while, we focus on the school, but what we've been trying to do is get the focus on the kid to make sure that our children are learning what they need to know to be able to survive in this. And that's one of the places that we'll be able to greatly improve as we move on in this. One of the surprises to everybody would probably be to find out that the federal government only requires 1 federal test. You always hear about all the testing the kids have to do across the nation. Well, a lot of that's locally imposed. That's tests that they think are necessary. But the federal government says you need to have one at the end of the year, and that's what we've concentrated on with the disaggregation. So there have been a lot of surprises for people as they actually take a look at what that rather voluminous bill has in it. And I think we are moving to a point where we should be able to get something done and get something done relatively quickly. And again, it'll be because of the work of these people that have put together some bills to bring attention to some very specific parts that need some improvement. And I thank you for doing that. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Senator R-N.C., and thank you for your leadership and the constructive way you and Senator Harkin are working together. I should emphasize, I said in my remarks, the respect all of us have for Secretary Duncan. He's done a terrific job staying in touch with us without regard to political party. And the President and he have stuck their necks out on some issues that aren't entirely popular with their Democratic constituency. We respect that as well. So as I said, our effort is to take these ideas and recognize we're in the 9th year of a bill that was supposed to be fixed after 5 years and get it done before the end of the year. One example of what we could do, the senator from Illinois will talk about. He's been the leader on expanding opportunities for parents and communities to use charter schools. The House of Representatives acted on that bill yesterday, Senator Kirk.
Joining as part of this effort, I think we need to reform No Child Left Behind. We should focus on making sure we preserve disclosure and the right of parents to know how their schools are doing without destroying the school, without having an AYP measurement that somehow says that most, if not all, schools are failing. As part of this effort, I'm introducing the Empowering Parents Through Quality Charter Schools Act to emphasize charter schools and to make sure that their opportunities are more widely available to parents and children, especially in inner cities. This is a chart that shows the top 10 non-selective, meaning they take everyone, public high schools in Chicago. And they're ranked in order of ACT scores. And you can see here Lincoln Park High School is number 1, not a charter school. But in the top 10, 8 of them are charter schools. And these are in some of the toughest neighborhoods in Chicagoland. That's why this is one of the number 1 issues being discussed right now in Chicago. Mayor Emanuel doing an outstanding job of leading a reform effort to make charter schools more available, to expand the day of instruction, and to expand the number of days in the school year, because right now Chicagoland suffers from some of the lowest numbers of days of instruction in the country. Right now, for example, in Chicagoland, only about 10% of kids have the opportunity to go to a charter school. I think that we should set a goal of at least 50% having that opportunity. Recently, I was able to visit the Noble Street schools, also another school which was represented about 99% African American, overwhelmingly free and reduced lunch kids, and this school is outperforming all of its peers. Despite not having any selection criteria and being able to take kids from all walks of life, including special needs kids. We are seeing something working here. Mayor Emanuel sees it, I see it, and that's why in the House of Representatives, when the companion legislation was considered, 365 representatives, including well over 100 Democratic representatives, supported our charter school bill. We're introducing the companion over here. I'm hoping for equal amounts of bipartisan support, because what we see is working in Chicago can work elsewhere. Now, the charter school movement is generally focused on inner cities, but I want to make sure that charter schools are offered to kids in Peoria, in Springfield, in Rockford, in Metro East. And so the kind of success that we're seeing here, 8 out of 10 top performers being charter schools for non-selective public high schools, is something that I think we should have offered here. And that's why I applaud our ranking member, and especially Senator Alexander, for putting together this group of bills to offer a higher education performance for America's kids, especially in the tough global political environment that they'll be in. And with that, I yield back to our leader on this joint effort and ranking minority member, and thank them for the opportunity to speak.
Mr. President, how much time is remaining?
15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Every American knows that every American's job is on the line, and every American knows that better schools mean better jobs. We're ready to work with the President, with our Democratic colleagues, to create an environment for better schools in this country by fixing No Child Left Behind. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.